In the days when empires stretched vast, from the rivers of India to the coasts of Ethiopia, one throne commanded 127 provinces. Power clothed itself in splendor, and pride ruled in the palace of Shushan. Yet in the midst of banquets and decrees, a secret was kept. A young woman, orphaned and unknown, concealed her true name and her true people. From silence, she was lifted to a crown, from obscurity to a throne. But shadows rose with her, an enemy's plot, a decree of death, a people destined for destruction. In that hour she was called to choose concealment or courage, silence or sacrifice. This is the story of Esther, the hidden queen. In the days when mighty Ahasuerus reigned, his dominion stretched vast and unbroken. From the rising sun in India to the lands of Ethiopia's dark rivers, 127 provinces bent beneath his crown. His throne was set in Shushan, the palace. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he displayed his power to all Persia and Media. Princes, nobles, and governors of the provinces gathered, beholding the splendor of his majesty. For 180 days the wealth of his kingdom and the honor of his glory were unveiled before their eyes. When these days were fulfilled, the king decreed another feast, this time for all who dwelt in Shushan the palace, both the mighty and the humble alike. For 7 days they gathered in the garden court of the king's house. The place was adorned with white, green, and blue hangings, bound by cords of fine linen and purple, fastened to rings of silver and pillars of marble. The couches were of gold and silver, set upon pavements of red, blue, white, and black marble. Golden vessels, each unique in design, were filled with royal wine flowing in abundance, poured out according to the bounty of the king. None were compelled to drink beyond their desire, for the king had commanded that each man might take according to his own pleasure. And Vashti the queen also made a feast for the women in the royal house of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when wine had gladdened the heart of the king, he called for his 7 chamberlains, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, those who served continually in his presence. He commanded them to bring Vashti the queen before him, crowned with royal diadem, that all the people and princes might behold her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, delivered by his chamberlains, and the king's heart burned with fury. His anger flamed hot within him. Then the king turned to the wise men, those who knew the times and were versed in law and judgment. Closest to him were Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who beheld the king's face and held the first seats of the realm. He asked, "What shall be done unto Queen Vashti according to law, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the chamberlains?" Memucan spoke before the king and princes. "Vashti the queen has done wrong not to the king only, but to all princes and all people who dwell in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For when her deed is known, all wives will look upon their husbands with contempt, saying, 'King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she came not.' From this day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will speak likewise to all the king's princes, and there will be no end of scorn and wrath. If it please the king, Let there go forth a royal decree written among the immutable laws of the Persians and the Medes, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus. Let the king bestow her royal estate upon another, one more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout all the empire, for great is the realm, all wives, great and small, will give honor to their husbands. The saying pleased the king and his princes, and the king did as Memucan advised. He sent letters into every province, to every people in their own script and tongue, declaring that every man should rule in his own house. Thus was Vashti removed, and the throne left empty, awaiting another. When the anger of King Ahasuerus had ebbed away, his thoughts turned again to Vashti, what she had done, and the decree that removed her. The throne beside him stood empty, and his servants, eager to please, said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let officers be appointed in all the provinces to gather them into Shushan the palace, into the house of the women under the care of Agagite, keeper of the king's harem. Provide for them all that is needed for purification. Then let the maiden who pleases the king be queen in Vashti's stead." The council pleased the king, and so he decreed. Now in Shushan there dwelt a Jew named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. He had been carried away from Jerusalem in the exile with King Jeconiah, when Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took the captives. With him was his cousin Hadassah, called Esther, an orphaned girl whom Mordecai had raised as his own daughter. She was fair and beautiful, and under his care had grown in grace and wisdom. When the king's decree was proclaimed and many maidens were gathered into Shushan, Esther too was taken into the custody of Agagite, guardian of the women. The maiden pleased him and won his favor. He quickly provided her with all that was needed for her purification, assigned 7 attendants chosen from the palace, and placed her and her maidens in the best part of the women's quarters. Yet Esther told no one of her people nor her lineage, for Mordecai had charged her to keep it hidden. And Mordecai, anxious for her welfare, walked each day near the court of the women's house seeking news of her. The time of preparation for each maiden was long, 12 months in all. 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and ointments for purification. Only after this did each young woman go to the king, taking with her whatever she desired from the house of the women. She would spend the evening with the king, and on the morrow return to the second house under Shashgaz, keeper of the concubines. There she remained, unless the king delighted in her and called her by name. When the time came for Esther, daughter of Abihail and adopted daughter of Mordecai, to be presented to the king, she asked for nothing beyond what Agagite advised, and all who beheld her looked upon her with favor. So in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, Esther was taken into the royal house. The king loved Esther above all the women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. And he set the royal crown upon her head, making her queen in the place of Vashti. The king proclaimed a great feast in her honor, Esther's feast, for all his princes and servants. He granted remission of tribute to the provinces, and gave gifts as befit a king's generosity. Meanwhile, Mordecai sat at the king's gate. Esther, though now queen, did not reveal her kindred or her people, for she still obeyed Mordecai as she had in her youth. In those days, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, who guarded the threshold, conspired in wrath to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. The matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther declared it to the king in Mordecai's name. An inquiry was made, and the plot was discovered. The conspirators were hanged on a tree, and the matter was recorded in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Thus the orphan became queen, the hidden daughter exalted, while Mordecai's faithfulness was quietly written into the records of a kingdom. After these things, King Ahasuerus exalted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. He advanced him above all the princes who were with him, setting his seat high in the royal court. At the king's command, all the servants who stood at the gate bowed down before Haman, paying him homage. Yet one man did not bend his knee: Mordecai the Jew. Day after day the king's servants pressed him. "Why transgressest thou the king's commandment?" But Mordecai heeded them not, for he had told them he was a Jew. At last they carried the matter to Haman himself, testing whether Mordecai's resolve would endure. When Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed nor paid him reverence, wrath consumed him. Yet he thought it too small a thing to strike Mordecai alone, for he learned of Mordecai's people. And so hatred swelled within him, hatred vast enough to seek the destruction of every Jew throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the first month, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Haman cast pur, that is, the lot, before him day after day, seeking the appointed time. The lot fell to the 12th month, the month Adar. Then Haman went before the king with cunning words. "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your realm. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. It is not fitting for the king to allow them to remain. If it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. I will place 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those charged with the business, to be brought into the treasuries of the king." The king, unseeing of the malice hidden within, removed the signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. He said, "The silver is given to thee, and the people also, to do with them as it seems good to thee." On the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned. All was written as Haman commanded to the king's lieutenants, governors, and rulers over every province, in every script and tongue of the peoples. The letters bore the name of King Ahasuerus and were sealed with his ring. They decreed, on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month Adar, all Jews, young and old, little children and women, were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated in one day. Their goods were to be plundered as spoil. Copies of the decree were sent to every province that the people might prepare for that day. Swiftly the couriers departed, hastened by the king's command. The decree was proclaimed in Shushan the palace. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, their hearts unmoved. But in the city of Shushan, perplexity and dread fell upon the people. When Mordecai learned all that had been decreed, anguish seized him. He tore his garments, clothed himself in sackcloth, and heaped ashes upon his head. With a cry loud and bitter, he went out into the heart of the city. He came even to the king's gate, though none might pass within clothed in sackcloth. Across the empire, wherever the decree was read, the Jews mourned greatly. There was fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes, bowed low in grief. Word reached Esther through her maids and chamberlains, and the queen was distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai, to remove from him his sackcloth, but he refused them. So Esther called for Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains appointed to attend her, and sent him to Mordecai to learn what troubled him. Hatak went to Mordecai in the city square before the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened. He revealed the sum of money Haman had promised to place in the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the decree that was published in Shushan, that Hatak might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go before the king to plead for her people." Hatak returned with Mordecai's words, and Esther answered, "All the king's servants and all the people of the provinces know this law. If any man or woman goes before the king in the inner court unbidden, there is but one sentence: death, unless the king holds out the golden scepter that he may live. But I have not been called to go before the king these 30 days. Hatak carried her words back to Mordecai. Then Mordecai sent this reply: "Think not within thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if you hold your peace at this time, deliverance and relief will arise to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you are come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther, struck by his words, sent her answer: "Go, gather together all the Jews in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will fast likewise. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai departed and did all according to Esther's command. The 3rd day Esther clothed herself in royal garments. With steady resolve she entered the inner court of the king's house, standing opposite the royal hall. There sat the king upon his throne, facing the entrance, sovereign in splendor. When his eyes fell upon Esther, favor rose within him. He extended the golden scepter in his hand toward her. She stepped forward and touched its tip. The king said, "What wilt thou, Queen Esther? What is thy request? It shall be granted thee, even unto half of the kingdom." Esther answered with measured words, "If it seem good to the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him." The king said, "Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said." And so the king and Haman came to the banquet Esther had prepared. As wine was poured, the king asked again, "What is thy petition? It shall be granted thee. What is thy request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be performed." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this: if I have found favor in the king's sight, and if it pleases the king to grant my desire, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I shall prepare for them. Then will I answer as the king has said." That day Haman departed with joy in his heart. Yet when he passed by the king's gate, there sat Mordecai. He neither rose nor trembled before him. Fury ignited in Haman, yet he restrained himself and went home. There he gathered his friends and Zeresh his wife. He spoke boastfully of the splendor of his riches, the multitude of his sons, and the honor the king had bestowed on him, exalting him above the princes and servants. "Yea," he said, "Esther the queen let no man but me come with the king unto the banquet she prepared. Tomorrow also I am invited with the king." Yet even as he gloried, bitterness rose in him. "All this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Then Zeresh his wife and all his friends advised him,
"Let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king,
that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet." Counsel pleased Haman. Pride swelled into cruelty, and he ordered the gallows to be built. That night the king could not sleep. Rest fled from him, and so he commanded that the book of records, the chronicles of the kingdom, be brought and read aloud before him. As the pages turned, it was found written how Mordecai had once revealed the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's chamberlains, who had conspired to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. The king asked, "What honor and recognition has been done for Mordecai for this?" And the servants who attended him answered, "Nothing has been done for him." Then the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now at that very moment, Haman had entered the outer court of the palace, intending to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared. The king's servants said, "Behold, Haman stands in the court." And the king commanded, "Let him come in." So Haman entered. The king asked him, "What shall be done unto the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And he answered, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king himself wears, and the horse upon which the king rides, and let a royal crown be set upon his head. Let the apparel and the horse be delivered into the hands of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may clothe the man whom the king delights to honor, and parade him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Make haste, take the apparel and the horse, just as you have said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken." So Haman took the apparel and the horse. With his own hands he clothed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, crying aloud before him, "Thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delights to honor." When it was finished, Mordecai returned quietly to the king's gate. But Haman hurried home, mourning, his head covered in shame. He told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him. And his wise men, along with Zeresh, said to him, "If Mordecai is of the seed of the Jews, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but surely you shall fall before him." Even as they spoke, the king's chamberlains arrived, hastening to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman came once more to banquet with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they drank wine, the king turned again to her and said, "What is thy petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted thee. What is thy request? Even to half of the kingdom. It shall be performed." Then Esther the queen answered, "If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. If we had been sold only for bondmen and bondwomen, I would have remained silent, for such affliction would not have been worth troubling the king." King Ahasuerus demanded, "Who is he and where is he that dares presume in his heart to do such a thing?" And Esther said with steady voice, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Then terror seized Haman, for he stood exposed before the king and the queen. In his wrath, the king arose from the banquet and went out into the palace garden. Haman, desperate, stood to plead for his life with Esther, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. As the king returned from the garden into the banquet hall, behold, Haman had fallen upon the couch where Esther reclined. The king cried out, "Will he also assault the queen in my own house, before my very eyes?" Even as the words left the king's mouth, Haman's face was covered. Then Harbonah, one of the king's chamberlains, spoke, "Behold, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman built for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king, stands in the house of Haman." The king said, "Hang him thereon." So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath was pacified. On that day, King Ahasuerus bestowed upon Queen Esther the house of Haman the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther revealed his kinship to her. The king removed the royal signet ring he had taken from Haman and placed it upon Mordecai's hand. Esther set Mordecai over Haman's estate, raising the once-forgotten gatekeeper to power. Yet Esther was not finished. She came again before the king, falling at his feet, weeping with tears, and pleaded that the evil devised by Haman the Agagite might be undone. The king held out the golden scepter, and Esther arose, standing before him. She said, "If it please the king, if I have found favor in his sight, if the things seem right before him, and if I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the provinces of the king. For how can I endure to see the calamity that will fall upon my people? How can I endure to witness the destruction of my kindred?" King Ahasuerus replied to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Now you may write on behalf of the Jews, as it pleases you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse." So the king's scribes were called on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. According to Mordecai's command, letters were written to the Jews, to the satraps, governors, and rulers of all 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia, to each province in its own script and language, and to the Jews in their own tongue. The decree was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's ring. Letters were sent by swift couriers riding royal horses, mules, camels, and dromedaries throughout the empire. The decree granted the Jews in every city the right to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, slay, and annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, together with their little ones and women, and to plunder their goods. This was to take place on one appointed day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month Adar. Copies of the decree were issued in every province, published to all peoples, so that the Jews might be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the swift steeds of the king, hastened out, pressed on by the royal command. The decree was also proclaimed in Shushan the palace. Then Mordecai went out from the king's presence, clothed in royal robes of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. For the Jews there was light and gladness and joy and honor. In every province and in every city where the king's command and decree arrived, the Jews celebrated with feasting and gladness, a holiday of rejoicing. And many of the people of the land declared themselves Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. In the 12th month, the month of Adar, on the 13th day, the very day when the king's command and decree were to be carried out, when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain power over them, everything was turned to the contrary. Instead, the Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hand on those who sought their harm. None could withstand them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all people. The rulers of the provinces, the satraps, governors, and officers of the king all helped the Jews, because the fame of Mordecai had spread, and the fear of him had fallen upon them. For Mordecai had become great in the king's house, and his renown went out through every province. He waxed greater and greater. So the Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, slaughter and destruction, and did to those who hated them as they pleased. In Shushan, the citadel itself, the Jews slew 500 men. Among them were the 10 sons of Haman, Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vajizatha. But though their enemies' lives were taken, the Jews did not lay hands on the spoil. That very day, the number of the slain in Shushan was reported to the king. Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen, "The Jews have slain 500 men in Shushan, and the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of my provinces? Now what is thy petition? It shall be granted thee. What is thy request further? It shall be done." Esther answered, "If it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews in Shushan to do tomorrow also, according to this day's decree, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged upon the gallows." The king commanded it so. The decree was issued in Shushan, and the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. The Jews in Shushan gathered again on the 14th day of Adar and slew 300 men, but they did not lay hand on the prey. Meanwhile, the rest of the Jews in the king's provinces also assembled, standing for their lives, gaining relief from their enemies, and striking down 75,000 of their foes. Yet they too did not take the spoil. Thus, on the 13th day they fought. On the 14th they rested, making it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews in Shushan assembled on the 13th and the 14th, and on the 15th day they rested, making that day a festival of joy. Therefore the Jews who lived in villages and unwalled towns made the 14th day of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, a holiday of sending portions one to another. Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews in the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, establishing among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of Adar. These were the days when the Jews had rest from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a holiday, that they should keep them as days of feasting and joy, of sending food to one another and gifts to the poor. The Jews accepted what they had begun to do, as Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised their destruction and cast Pur, the lot, to consume and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that Haman's wicked device should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged upon the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Because of this, and because of all they had seen and all that had come upon them, the Jews established and took it upon themselves, their descendants and all who would join them, that without fail they would keep these 2 days according to the writing, at the appointed time, every year. These days were to be remembered and observed in every generation, in every family, in every province, and in every city, that the days of Purim would never cease among the Jews, nor would their remembrance perish from their descendants. Then Esther, a queen, daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. He sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth, to establish these days of Purim in their appointed times, as Esther the queen and Mordecai the Jew had decreed for themselves and for their seed, concerning the matters of fasting and lamentation. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. In those days, King Ahasuerus laid tribute upon the land, and even upon the distant isles of the sea, his dominion stretching to the ends of the earth. All the acts of his power and might, and the record of Mordecai's greatness, to which the king exalted him, are written in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. From Mordecai the Jew stood second only to King Ahasuerus. Among the Jews, he was held in honor, beloved by the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and spoke peace to all his descendants. Thus the orphan girl Hadassah, Esther, had risen to the throne for such a time as this, and her cousin Mordecai, once a forgotten watchman at the gate, became a prince of peace in the land. Their names and their deeds were woven into the memory of their people, sealed forever in the festival of Purim, a testimony of deliverance, a light against the darkness of the age. Did you like the video? Write a comment, hit the like button, and share this content with others who are interested in the subject. See you in the next video.